Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are super excited to have you all here for this session on maximizing the impact of your experimentation strategy. My name is Polly Lugo. I'm the Director of Growth and Partnerships here at Roboboogie. For those who don't know us, Roboboogie is a CRO agency that helps brands get better results from their CRO efforts. Our expertise really lies in building and managing end-to-end CRO programs, optimizing user experiences through data, and really enhancing your internal CRO capabilities for long-term growth. We're super thrilled to be partnered with SiteSpect. Their platform supports advanced capabilities in testing and personalization. And together, SiteSpect and Roboboogie, we bring strategy and tools that brands need to run really effective, results-oriented CRO programs. I'm co-hosting today's session with the amazing John Mead, the Global Director of Sales Engineering and Partnerships at SiteSpect. John brings a lot of technical and strategic insight in helping brands make the most out of SiteSpect's platform. Before he runs us through the agenda and introduces the speakers, I just wanted to encourage everyone to use the Q&A feature for questions that come up. We'll also have a few poll questions during the session and time at the end for dedicated Q&A as well. So please feel free to keep notes and chime in. And at this point, I will pass it over to John.
Cool. Thank you so much, Polly. Appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Really great to have you here. We're really excited to run through this. Like Polly said, Global Director of Sales Engineering and Partnerships, just really excited to work with Roboboogie on bringing you guys some great insights here. We are joined by some pretty high caliber folks here as well. Paul Bernier, he's our VP of Product Management here at SiteSpect. Some phenomenal experience in the space, both working through experimentation program design, as well as the different technologies that can be leveraged in the space too. We are also joined by Tyler Hudson, the Director of Analytics and Insights from Roboboogie. Tyler brings a wealth of experience strategizing with Roboboogie clients and some serious expertise in the space. I'll jump through the agenda here next. And while we go through this, I do want to just kind of double click into what Polly mentioned. While we're going through this, please ask questions. Feel free to jump into the chat and throw anything our way. We want to make sure that this is valuable for all of you folks who've joined today. So first, we'll kick it off with Tyler, going through the strategies to improve your program. Like I mentioned, Tyler has been in the industry for a while. Some great insights in how to leverage experimentation programs to bring real value and real ROI to the Roboboogie client base. Then we'll flip over to Paul Bernier, going through team structure and technologies, really how to design your experimentation program to have the best success, both in the short term and in the long term, to really drive your platform, your product, and your end users' success as well. And then we'll finish it up there with Tyler Hudson, bringing it back to the prioritization calculator. Right, what should come first? Where should different tasks and priorities be aligned when you're thinking about an experimentation program? So at this point, I'll hand over to my colleague here, Tyler, to dig into the strategies.
Awesome. Thank you, John. So yeah, we've got a lot of good content to cover today. Thank you all for carving some time. Happy Halloween as well. We're going to talk through a few different pieces to start us off. Really, I want to focus this section on what are some strategies that you can bring into your program today to ultimately add value to it. Before we jump into that, though, I want to first define a term. My goal today is to get us away from this term, but the term is spaghetti testing. We've all been there. This is when you're throwing a test idea at the wall and hope that it sticks and achieves your program goals. We're going to walk through a few areas to get us away from spaghetti testing. So in this section, I want to dive deep into a few components that I've seen that are sometimes overlooked in a program. So this is going to really set a foundation for how do we build momentum and ultimately get away from that spaghetti testing approach. So the 5 areas that I'm going to discuss today are establishing program goals. Really, my focus in this is to get us away from only looking at conversion rate as our measure of success within a program. We're then going to talk about optimization themes and how they can structure ideation sessions, as well as bring more of a rigor to your program and ensure you're looking holistically at your site experience. From there, we're going to jump into pre-test planning. One of my favorite topics, one of the most impactful pieces that we bring to programs is that structure and rigor in the pre-test planning. It's going to integrate really well with some of Paul's content, and we're going to dive deep into this section to really make sure that you all have the tools and the know-how on how to bring more structure into your program. From there, as John was saying, we're going to talk a lot about prioritization framework today. I'm going to introduce the concept, and then at the end of today's call, we'll dive really deep into some components in a prioritization framework to ensure that you have some statistical rigor into your CRO program. And then the output of all this, the roadmap. The roadmap is a central hub for your organization or if you're on the agency side, your clients to see what you're doing and ultimately understand the work that's coming down the line. So as I go through all these sections, the goal is to get away from spaghetti testing. There's a time and place for it, sure, but ultimately we want to make sure that we're bringing in structure to help ensure that we're hitting our program goals. So let's dive into it. Looking at program goals, I cannot stress the importance of setting and revisiting your CRO program objectives. If you feel sometimes like the organization may not see value in the work that you're doing, setting these goals and sharing them out is going to be a great way to ultimately build that momentum with the program. Um, One of the things I'm most passionate about within the CRO space is debunking the conversion rate dilemma. We all know that a lot of objectives are centered around improving conversion rate, and I'm not advocating that we ignore conversion rate. I am advocating that we dive a little deeper into the factors that build towards conversion rate. So when we look at a program objective, it may be in, let's take an example. Let's improve conversion rate by 5x. It's a great goal, but we all know there are a lot of factors that build into conversion rate. So as we look through this, take a moment to kind of document all of those different factors that can build towards conversion rate. We're going to talk a little bit later about a hub and spoke methodology for structuring a program. And this is a great way to map to individual goals at a department level or an org level to ensure that your program is solving these pain points. So when we look at setting program goals, one of the big things that I would recommend is you start by documenting what is your business objective for the year, what is your business objective for the quarter, and then work backwards to that. We need to have data points to guide us in a CRO program, but let's start with just what are those objectives and then work back from that. From there, it's really critical to determine what lines of businesses are available to impact your program. So ultimately, how many departments are touching your CRO efforts? What are their individual goals? And how do we fold those in together to tell a cohesive story on what we're trying to do with our program? As I mentioned, the data is a critical component. My background is in analytics, but I really want to also stress the importance of defining user journey phases for your program. So as I mentioned, the conversion rate dilemma, every test is not going to improve conversion rate. We need to look at those different phases in a user journey and map our tests accordingly. So if you're not familiar with what a user journey phase is, I'll take one example here and kind of build on it. Let's look at the educational phase of the user journey. So this would be somebody who's just getting experience into your site, just experiencing your brand for the first time. Your program objective should be unique to that phase. So as we structure our CRO programs, we want to make sure that we're solving pain points along the way. So education is a core factor. Things like bounce rate, time on page, page engagement rate, those metrics will really help build towards your end goal of improving conversion. So start with documenting your program goals, build those out into individual measurable items, and then go from there. After we have our program goals, one of the things that we'll bring to all of our engagements is something called optimization themes. Now, this is a new term for you all. Optimization themes are a great way to bring a user-centric approach to CRO. Optimization themes ultimately balance a few different things. So if you're feeling like, hey, we want to see your conversion rate go, but we also want our site to modernize, sometimes those two things are in conflict with each other. Not always the most complex test is going to lead to the best results. We can thank Amazon for simplifying a lot of the web, and that really does resonate with users. So what we want to look at is how do we structure these themes to support our objectives. if you're only focusing on conversion metrics, ultimately this can start to kind of stagnate over time. We want to bring these themes as a way to provide structure and balance between the what we're testing and the why we're testing. So think of optimization themes as the why. Let's dive into an example of kind of what these could look like. So when we're building optimization themes for a program, there's kind of two benefits. The first benefit is it does provide structure and make sure that you're treating all of your customers in your CRO program. As I mentioned, if you're in the educational phase or you're in the conversion phase, whatever that may be, structuring these themes from a user perspective is ultimately going to provide a lot more value and scalability to your program. So the way we start with these is kind of twofold. First piece is data analysis. I'm always going to recommend that we're looking at what are those friction points surface within our reporting, and then pairing that with design audits. So again, this is that mix of data and design that I think is really integral for a successful CRO program. Once you have these audits done, synthesize these into optimization themes. So this is like an experiential theme to help structure your program. So one example here would be we want to serve the right content for the right person. How are we structuring our tests that map within that theme? And ultimately, how do we start to prescribe a roadmap that will solve this pain point for the user? So let's take an example. If you have a lot of different products, let's say you're an e-commerce shop, and you want to drive towards some of those high ticket items by showing that right content at that right time. So take these optimization themes more as an experiential standpoint rather than a data standpoint. What is the pain point we're trying to solve for our customers? Another really critical area for optimization themes is helping to provide structure to your ideation sessions. If you're not currently doing ideation sessions, I would encourage you to start doing this as soon as possible. Spend some time documenting your optimization themes and then roll into this ideation process. These themes are a great way not only to categorize tests, but if you have an existing roadmap, let's say you have a really large backlog of tests, map these out to your optimization themes. You may see some gaps emerge in your testing roadmap that you can help fill and backlog additional ideas. So when we look at these optimization themes, the goal here is to provide a holistic approach to CRO. So we want to make sure that we're testing at different areas, different use cases, and ultimately building that up into an optimization theme. I love this for ideation sessions. Again, as I mentioned, start doing ideation sessions with a larger team. As you have these themes, it's a great way for people to step out of the day-to-day and think about what's possible from a CRO perspective. So if you're working in a small CRO team, invite other parts of the org to these sessions. Again, we see a lot of value. We run a lot of these sessions, and just getting people to think about what's possible for the site is a great way to build momentum towards your program. So the optimization themes, they really do set that structure. They set your guardrails, and ultimately they show where your gaps in the program are as well. Where are the areas that you're not looking at? Where are the areas that may be a really big blocker for customer experience? And then starting to assign values and test objectives that alleviate those pain points. Again, as I mentioned in the intro here, pre-test planning, we're covering a lot of those functional strategies to bring into your program. Pre-test planning is a really important step that is sometimes overlooked, especially in new CRO programs. So we really recommend to utilize pre-test planning phase to ensure that you have variables documented. So if you find that stakeholders are often looking at test results as soon as a test launches, trying to conclude tests one day in, unless you have millions of sessions, you're likely looking at a false positive there. So utilize pre-test planning to ultimately set your guardrails early. Make sure that the organization and people touching the program understand the need for a larger sample size, and ultimately what is that minimum that you need to hit to ultimately call a conclusive result. So when we look at pre-test planning, one of the areas that we build for all of our clients is a testing brief that centralizes all of the components of a test and has a central hub for people to look at if they're curious and maybe on the outside of the CRO program. The biggest piece here that we've seen kind of maybe stagnate programs over time is pausing tests early, looking at tests without the statistical rigor. So if you're working with a client or you're working on a program internally, Using these pretest planning variables will help set structure to your CRO program. We look at, all the time it takes to get a test live, the amount of people that are involved in setting a test live. Make sure you're documenting these things so we can ultimately have that accountability as a team, and we know what we're doing before we start having data that may bias a decision. So when we look at minimum detectable effect, this is one of the more important pieces of the testing brief from our perspective. Ultimately, we need to set what our MDE is at a test level. I wouldn't recommend setting that at a program level. And the main reason for that is it's going to factor in what is your conversion goal for the test itself? What is the traffic to the page location that you're testing on? And setting that MDE based on, development effort to get it live, ultimately is going to provide that structure for your program. And these are guardrails, right? These are going to be guardrails that save you time in the future. So if you don't have a testing brief currently in your process, bring that in, start building out these factors. If you have questions about components that you need to include in your testing briefs, reach out to us. We're happy to talk through this. Really having that central document is going to save you time, energy, and maybe future headaches as you go through the testing process. All right, so as we continue to roll through here, I want to touch kind of briefly on the prioritization framework. So if you all are familiar with the hippo effect, it's the highest paid person's opinion, sometimes little ears, small mouth. Not always, not every stakeholder is the same, and I'm not insinuating anything. But the way to get around that is to score your tests. So we're going to talk a lot about prioritization at the end of today's call, and taking some of the subjectivity out of what is coming next in your roadmap. So I really encourage you, if you do not have a prioritization framework, bring this into your program as soon as you can. This will take a lot of the subjectivity out of, we want to test this next, or we want to test this next, and it'll assign a data value to it to ultimately take some of that subjectivity out. That's really the goal here, is to provide structure to your program and strategically improve that test velocity and ultimately the output as well. So twofold with a prioritization calculator. It can serve as a robust test archive and a prioritization tool. So what we'll use for our clients is kind of a central document that allows us to track what the test is, what are the variables, and then ultimately output that into a ranking system. So I'll go quickly through this section just because we will dive deeper into it at the end of the call. But the goal of a prioritization calculator, again, is to take that subjectivity out of what's coming next. This is a great way to also ensure that you're hitting all of your different optimization themes as well. Because again, when we look at CRO, we want to improve conversion rate, but we want to look at each step in the user experience and make sure that we're prescribing solutions that are going to alleviate any pain points that we might have. The other benefit here is as you're filling out these elements within your calculator, this makes your test brief creation very, very easy. It allows for you to do some of that upfront work and scalability of bringing these into a testing brief by filling out this calculator, making it as dynamic as possible. So we'll dive a little deeper into that. But I want to talk about the output of all of these strategies. Kind of to wrap up this initial section, I want to talk through roadmap and the importance of roadmap. Now, Roboboogie, we did not create the term roadmap. I'm not trying to take any credit for it at all. But there are a few components for a CRO program roadmap that I do want to touch on. If you find yourself getting the question, hey, when is this test going live? What are we testing now? What tests are currently live? Centralizing your program roadmap and sharing it frequently is going to help a lot on that front. It's going to bring that structure to your program and ultimately allow you to share what's coming down the line, get input from people, and then you'll see like all of these things are so connected that ultimately when you start building these out, they're going to build on each other. So when we look at our roadmap, there are a few things I want to hit on for this. So the way we structure our project roadmaps, obviously, is going to be dependent on scope and scale of the engagement, but we break it out into a few different elements. So when you're building out a roadmap, if you already have one, I would really recommend that you bring optimization themes into your shareable roadmap. So you're bringing that user experience perspective, setting it into your roadmap, and ultimately providing that structure as well. So we look at optimization themes like building purchase momentum. Let's document all the tests that match towards that optimization theme. If you find as you're building your roadmap that maybe certain areas are underrepresented, take a look at that. It's a great accountability check to make sure that you're looking holistically at your site experience. The other part that we'll often include is test type. So test type at Roboboogie, we kind of bucket them into two major buckets. The first bucket is iterative. That's your standard kind of A/B testing. And then we also have innovative. It's really critical to look at how are you balancing iterative and innovative tests. Paul's going to walk through a few really great examples on how to structure that from server side and client side testing. But ultimately, what we want to look at from a roadmap is how are we balancing our test types to maximize velocity? So when we structure these into themes, when we start to bring in test types, this brings awareness to the org. So I would recommend if you're working internally on a CRO program, share out your roadmap once a month. Post it in Slack or Teams or whatever channel you use to communicate, and make sure that the team has visibility because one of my favorite things about CRO programs is it does have the ability to bring teams together. So as you're working maybe on different objectives and different goals, sharing this out is a great way to build rapport across teams if you're in a large organization and ultimately build awareness into your program that you have spent a lot of time developing. It's really powerful once we start to see other departments who may not be involved directly in CRO start to contribute to the program and start to bring ideas forward. So share these out, share this structure out, and build awareness on what's coming down the line. So with all of these factors, again, this is more on the strategic improvements you can bring to your program today. We wanted to focus in on some certain elements that will really change your program over time. We've seen this structure ultimately increase test velocity and increase results because we're looking holistically at the picture in front of us and the opportunities in front of us. So with that, I will transition it over to Paul. I'm not able to move it forward, but Paul, I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Tyler. Super excited to be here and talk experimentation with you. Yeah, so you walked us through pre-test planning. We have our testing roadmap fleshed out. Priorities are straight. So how do we execute on it? So I'll talk a bit about the challenges in setting up a good team structure, which is a large part of, I think, the answer here. And then we'll talk about the technologies and the tooling. All right, so we'll walk through the different stages of experimentation growth. We'll talk about client-side and server-side techniques and a pitfall that we want to avoid as we start to embrace these technologies. We'll look at an effective hub-and-spoke model for structuring experimentation teams. And then we'll conclude by explaining how hybrid testing can really help optimization teams get more value out of their program. So let's dig in. So we see, team structures and tooling are really a factor of the size of the org and how mature the team is when it comes to experimentation. We typically see testing starting in marketing with a focus on acquisition channels. So think paid search, email traffic. It's all about optimizing promotions, landing pages, visuals, call to actions. That's great. There's a lot of value there, and it's a really good way to start to get familiar with experimentation and start to see value and to optimize your marketing expense. From here, a typical growth path is towards conversion rate optimization, CRO. You have specialists that get dedicated, and it moves a little bit away from just the acquisition channels, and it moves towards looking at the business as a whole and conversion rate as a whole, and how can you really impact the entire business. So this is often a point where the volume of testing is limited by the amount of resources available internally and by the tooling used. And there are just so many people that are actually qualified at CRO and dedicated to the testing program. They typically end up wearing multiple hats. So all of that together becomes a big challenge, and there's a lot of friction. Another growth path we see for larger orgs that see more and more value from testing is decentralization. As the organization starts to see value, you have different teams and business units that start to run their own program with their own goals and tooling. Now, this is very appealing because it provides more internal resources and skills to grow and scale. So there's sort of a natural inclination to go in that direction. The flip side is this approach introduces its own challenges. You have product owners and engineers that are often not experts at testing. Testing has a lot of bits and pieces to it, and they're experts on their own product, the part of the business they manage, the area of the website that they support. And so while you might see an increase in volume overall for testing, there's often a drop in quality. And that's when you start to see questions about the trustworthiness of test result that start to sort of creep up a bit. And then the other piece is there's no oversight for conflicts or for deconflicting. You have a lot of experiments that are running in parallel from different teams, and there's no one to really sort of deconflict that overall. So while this may allow you to increase the volume, it is also a really challenging growth path. So thinking about where you are today in terms of growth, maturity is always a really, really important step to understand where can you go next. The other piece that tends to happen as organizations grow and scale is that the tooling becomes a bottleneck. There are fundamentally two techniques that are used for experimentation. You have client-side tools and server-side or feature flagging. Organizations typically start with client-side. That's your classic tag-based solution. As we said earlier, that often starts with marketers. It's easy to use. There's a visual editor, meaning you don't necessarily need technical skills. This is great for look and feel, landing page optimization, messaging, branding, call to actions. And again, there's value in that approach. The flip side is client-side tools are limited in their ability to tackle more complex scenarios. They often fall short for feature testing. They struggle with single-page apps. They also introduce slowness and flicker. Now, flicker is this idea that users see the original, the controlled version of the page, and then it flickers quickly to a new treatment, a new image, a new hero. And this is terrible in the context of trying to create a better UX, right? Experimentation is all about creating a better experience. So this is a very negative component to it. They also suffer from data inaccuracies. There are more and more browsers that are really cracking down on user privacy, and client-side tracking, client-side cookies is getting locked down. You see Safari with ITP and Firefox ETP sort of closing that down. So in response to these challenges, server-side tools have come up, and they've been gaining in popularity, adoption. They were really built with engineering teams in mind. They're focused on releasing features through a method called feature flagging. So this is where experiences, variations are really built in the code base, and you require a code release to get any of these tests out the door. So this is great for feature and functionality testing, algorithms, redesigns, pricing strategies, more advanced layouts, things like that. And now these tools are really awesome at tackling complexity, and they provide a ton of value. Once again, there's a flip side. They introduce a new bottleneck, and that bottleneck is that it requires engineering skills. So this is a skill that's in high demand typically with an organization. Every test and variation now needs to go through a full code release. And some companies are really good at releasing frequently. A lot of organizations maybe release once a month. And so if you miss that train, you now have to wait for the next release. And that really makes the whole process of getting tests out the door, validating ideas, it tends to slow things down. So the result of this approach is that velocity slows down a bit. And then you have less learnings, time to value goes down. So the problem with this approach of having client side, server side, and on the other side is that from a marketing standpoint, the big challenges are not tackled. Teams are limited by the tooling. On the product engineering side of the house, the marketing initiatives tend to be deprioritized. They already have their roadmap of features to get out the door, and then innovation stalls. And that's the big problem, right? These tools being separate, they enforce silos rather than encourage collaboration and innovation, which is a big, big piece of experimentation. So how do we avoid falling for this trap? This is where team structure is part of the answer. And a proven model that works really, really well for both small and large orgs is the hub and spoke model. So the idea here is that you put experimentation right in the middle of the org and collaborate with various teams from different parts of the business. So the CRO, conversion rate optimization team, is the hub here. And this is typically made of analytics, experimentation experts, And you could be a team of one, right? But if you are able to bring in front-end developers, this will often help you get more out the door from your little cell, your hub. So the hub enforces best practices for traffic, sample size, a lot of what Tyler talked about earlier, all the pre-planning. They often build many of the tests themselves, but they also recruit from the spokes for building. Really, for building is key. And then the last piece is they act as traffic cop. They allocate traffic, they deconflict experiments, they prioritize. Ultimately, the hub is the team that will launch the experiments. So the CRO roadmap that Tyler mentioned is one of the key tool that gets used by the hub here. Now, the spokes are the business units, the product owners. So they act as domain experts. These teams exist to release new features, to improve a specific part, right? It could be the search team, it could be the checkout, it could be the lead gen. They're experts in their own field. And as a CRO team, you can tap into their expertise. A piece of friction we often see and hear about is CRO teams try to push their own ideas into these different business units. And these units already have incredibly busy roadmaps, and you get this tension, and teams get frustrated, can't push their ideas. It creates this friction. So, a really good way to start is to facilitate and be more of an enabler for testing what these business units already have on their roadmap. So now you start to make life easier for these teams. And the more you show results, the more you show how you can facilitate, the more it opens the door for your own ideas to get in there. So that's a good way to approach it. Another spoke here is the engineering team. They help you execute on more feature flagging, server-side experiments to get into more complexity. So they are, really, really key piece here in terms of scaling and getting more into complexity. So the hub and spoke model is really effective for growth and scale without the pitfalls of siloed decentralization and the sort of chaos that comes with it. As I said earlier, it works for small teams too. Don't think that this is just for large enterprise. You can be a really small hub. Maybe you have one or two business units you interface with, and you can scale up based on the size of the org. And this can be a little bit daunting initially to get into it, but I would encourage you to start with one agent of change. And what I mean by that is rather than try to get all the different business units and teams together, integrated within your program, start with one and start with the one that has the appetite. Starts with the one who's excited, interested about testing. Maybe you have some people that have already done it. Get some results out, get some wins if you can. That will help you build a case. It will get other spokes, other teams excited to join your program. So that's a really good way, I think, to approach it here. So if we go back to our experimentation growth path, here we go. Where do we go next? We have our team structure figured out. How do we solve for this divide in the tooling? And this is where hybrid experimentation comes in. It brings together both client side and server side under one roof, under one user interface. It encourages collaboration across marketing, product, and engineering. It makes program management a whole lot easier, having all of your tests into one platform, regardless of the actual means by which they are deployed, all in one place, makes program management, prioritization, deconflicting so much easier. And again, this works for small and large teams alike. There's a lot of gains for really organizations of all size. So I thought I could take an example here to illustrate what do we mean by hybrid experimentation beyond just the concept, because I get that it's a little bit theoretical. So this was a project that was ran by an online clothing retailer to revamp the product detail page experience. This included a transition from a typical thumbnail viewer to a vertical scrolling grid across the entire product catalog. And it needed to run across 3 different sites from the brand, across mobile desktop traffic. So a good amount of complexity overall. They needed data and many iterations to validate the new approach. It's one thing to say we're going to revamp our PDPs. It's another one to make sure it actually creates a better experience and it actually helps support KPIs and business goals. So they needed iteration and data. And last not least, they wanted to do all of that with less reliance on the development team and reduce the number of release cycles. So the solution here, or the answer, I would say, was hybrid experimentation, where they combined both client-side and server-side techniques together as part of a series of experiments. So they did 3 rounds of testing. The first round was done with a server-side feature flag only, and this was to test the new image viewer grid across the entire product catalog. So they found the new grid to be a winner, great, and they moved to a second iteration. For that second iteration, they combined that same winning feature flag from the first test, and then they combined that with a number of client-side changes. So this allowed them to test much more granular functionality as part of the PDP revamp at a much faster pace without having to go through a code release and server-side dev for every single change. So they tested a number of combinations. They tested the grid with a video tile embedded, the grid with a second recommendations tray, the grid with both the video tile and a second recs tray, and then the grid with a video tile, and they were moving the position of the afterpay option. So they found a winning variation there, which ended up being the image grid with the video tile and the additional recs tray. That's awesome. And then they ran another iteration on that winner. So the third series of experiments, again, it repurposed the original feature flag that was released at the very beginning of this process once, and they combined it with other changes. And so for this last round, it was all about figuring out the right positioning for that second recommendations tree. So the key to this process here is to start by identifying the critical piece of functionality that requires server-side change. Again, going back, there's this tendency to go all in one way or the other. We're all in server-side, we're all in client-side. The key here is you leverage both for the best possible application. And so they did this one code release, they got the complexity out the door, and then they iterated on multiple variations and tests only with client-side. And what this gave them ultimately is more iterations and variations, more learnings, with less resources and with less time to value. So win-win-win. And in other words, if they had not used hybrid experimentation, they would have run less experiments variations. They would not have extracted as much value from the project. They would not have refined the revamp as well. You could argue they would have left money on the table. The final thing I'd say here is it often gets lost as we get excited about testing. We look at results, great results and wins. We often lose sight of win rates. And a common number in the industry is a 10 to 20% win rate across a program. And that's for a relatively mature program. And so it's really important to fail fast. It's really important to reduce the amount of effort and resources that goes into validating ideas. The first place, we don't actually know if these ideas are going to work. So try to minimize the amount of work that goes into getting your ideas out. Server side, while extremely valuable, it tends to put much more effort into validating ideas. So hybrid is a really good way to strike that happy medium to maximize resources and reduce time and value. All right, so quick note on results. There we go. So this was great across the board. In the final iteration, they got a 2.86 increase in revenue per visit. If you extrapolate that to all visits, it was quite significant. And there was also a 3% reduction in page load time. So just a great example overall of the benefits of hybrid experimentation. So 3 takeaways I would kind of walk away from all of this. One is start today. We talk about scaling, maturity, hub and spoke, frameworks, all of it. There's a lot here, but just start wherever you are on this journey. The worst thing you could do is you're making changes to your website, your apps, without understanding the impact. Some of these things could be hurting, some of them could be good. So start testing if you haven't today. If you're already up and running, look at where you are on the growth journey. Try to understand what could be a next step for you. Look for pockets of innovation within your org. Think of agencies, like Roboboogie that can bring outside expertise to be a catalyst for internal change if you can't quite find that internally. Two, centralization works best. Whether you're a single CRO person or part of a larger org, consider really experimentation as a centralized operation. Collaborate with domain experts from different parts of the org and be a facilitator for experimentation. And then three, don't fall for the trap. Remember when I talked about the teams on the ledges? As experimentation grows, consider client-side, server-side together. Try to really not fall for this siloed operation. All right, so with that, Tyler, I'll pass it back to you. I think you're going to give us a practical example here of a prioritization calculator.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, so let's look at, again, some things you can start doing today. If you have a prioritization calculator, my hope is that we're introducing some new components. And really, the thing I want to stress with a test prioritization calculator, let's see if I can, I'm not able to transition things. Creating a business specific one. So ultimately, there is not a one size fits all with a prioritization calculator. We talked about the different program objectives. We talked about the different hub and spoke methodologies that Paul mentioned. This needs to be unique for your business and your program. We're going to talk through a few components to consider, but as I mentioned earlier, this is a great way to take some of the subjectivity out of what comes next. We often see CRO programs prioritized solely based on ROI potential. And now that is not necessarily a bad methodology. That's a great way to get revenue wins, but I want to look at how do we build more momentum around a business specific calculator. So what are the components for this? Prioritization factors kind of range in a few different areas. Now, this is not comprehensive of all the factors within a calculator, but it does give us a good start here. So the 5 areas I want to talk through are design lift, development lift, pre-test planning factors, leadership requests are a top business priority, and then also what is that data-driven and ROI projection. So with all of these pieces, again, the goal is to assign a value to these decisions, and ultimately the output is a ranking system for your test backlog. It's a great way to bring that structure into your program. So as we look at design, again, as Paul mentioned, with the hub and spoke methodology, depending on how big that hub is, this is a great way to introduce the spokes. This is a great way to bring your CRO program to other parts of the organization. So having conversations with your design team, if they're not involved day to day in the CRO program, have a meeting with them, dive into some of the complexities they're dealing with, and then start to assign a ranking system to these decisions. So things to consider when building out a test in terms of design, audience segmentation. So this is really like, are we targeting multiple segments in our audience and our personas, or are we doing a one size fits all? Are we testing everyone that comes to the page, or is there any personalization included? What is the scope and scale of design? So this is that iterative versus innovative that I introduced a little bit earlier. How big of a design initiative are we going forward with? Is this going to be server-side testing? Is this going to be something we can do with front-end testing? Ultimately, that scope and scale of design is going to really impact our ranking system. So that innovative versus iterative is a very large component of this. And we want to ensure that we're chatting with the design team, we're having those conversations about what is the scope and scale? How much time is this going to take? Now, this isn't the only part. We also want to look at things like development lift. Development lift looks at, again, is this a single page application? Are there any user flows and functionality we need to consider? Talk to your developers. That's really the most important part within a CRO program. Oftentimes, that can be an area where we really see programs transform. It's stepping out of the WYSIWYG editors and ultimately building more comprehensive experiences. That comes at a cost, that comes at time. So have these conversations with these teams, ultimately start to assign a value to each of these, and that will help bring the structure to your program. Ultimately, if you have 5 tests that are going to be really large development lifts, to Paul's point, your success rate is right around 10 to 20%. So we need to balance these things. And that's what this calculator really ends up doing is it balances priorities, it balances workloads, and ultimately allows you to move quicker through your experimentation program. Other things to consider are pre-test factors. So pre-test factors, things like minimum detectable effect and your sample size minimums. What is the test type? Where is the test running? There's often a lot of debate in the industry, and I think it's healthy debate about how many tests can be running at the same time. My measure of success for that is you need to know the impact on each test. So you can run tests at the same time. I'm not saying that you can't, maybe not on the same page, but if you look at the whole user journey, the trade-off of velocity is really the thing to decide there. So when we look at pre-test factors, spend time documenting this, look at your traffic to the page you're testing on, and make sure you're sharing this out with the organization to help set those guardrails. As we go through the rest of the other real factor is businesses change, priorities shift, initiatives come up. External dependencies are going to be a part of your CRO program. You may have an initiative driven by C-suite that they want to see live as soon as possible. That's great. That means there's input into the program. That's not necessarily a negative thing. Bring that in. Ultimately, start to consider those factors and build the experimentation model out for your organization. Again, it does connect a lot of these teams, as Paul was mentioning. Have those conversations and start to score those tests accordingly. So with a leadership request, flow those into the backlog, start to rank them, and start to prioritize based on those elements. Is there any need for cross-department collaboration? Again, is this going to be a feature rollout? Are we doing feature flag for the test itself? Are there upcoming changes that we may not know about in the CRO hub that we need to be aware of to help score these tests? So this is a great way. Again, I see the prioritization calculator more as a way to have those conversations with teams. That's really the goal here, is to bring more people along for the ride and build momentum for your program. The final piece, again, background in analytics. Ultimately, things should be data-driven from an experimentation perspective. It is the core of experimentation. But ultimately, we want to look at how are we scoring these things, both from a data perspective, but also from a customer perspective. So some of those design components, research components, those should be a part of your calculator. It should not only be focused on the ROI, especially as we look at the conversion rate dilemma that I was mentioning earlier. Improving ROI is a very tangled mix of different metrics. So detangle them, start to assign value to them, and make sure that you're bringing ROI as a part of this, but don't make it your entire calculator. We need to keep the customer in mind as we're rolling through test prioritization. So ultimately, with this, the final output for this, I don't know why the screen share is being a little tricky for me today, Polly. The ultimate output here is a ranked system of your tests. So as I mentioned, this is not a one size fits all. This is going to be dependent on your traffic, your goals, what you're selling. Is it a service? Ultimately, if you have questions around how to set up a prioritization calculator, reach out. I love talking about this stuff. I would be happy to lend some time to kind of dive into it. So again, as I mentioned earlier, this serves as both a backlog of test ideas as well as a ranking system to flow into your roadmap. So you're not always going to take the top test idea. This is more of a guide to help take subjectivity out. You still need to apply your strategies based on your program goals. So ultimately, build this out. Think about the factors that you may not be considering at this time for your test process, and start chatting with other departments around the impact CRO may have for them. Ultimately, that is the goal, is to bring that momentum back into the program or back into the hub itself. Awesome. And with that, I will transition it over to John.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Tyler. Whew, guys, we've covered a lot of information. This has been an incredibly valuable session. Yeah, I'm happy for those who joined because of everything that you just learned, or emphasized. Just a couple of real quick key takeaways here. Number one, centralized optimization for impact. We talked a lot about that hub and spoke model. This is really a great way to build that collaboration between your experimentation team and the rest of your organization to really build that impact out. Taking a look at number two, establish clear program goals. This is really just kind of like a life skill. Where do you, look at like a quarter from now or a year from now, and then work backward from that, right? Really great way to establish where you want to be and then build a process to get there, which brings us to our next one. Ensure that you have a robust framework for prioritization. Went through a couple of examples here. We talked through some of the processes here too. Having those brainstorming sessions and ways to gather test ideas is really super important to making sure that you're having impactful tests and you're getting the data from those tests in the right way to really execute really well. The next one there, spend time with pre-test planning. This goes back to the old adage, right? Measure twice, cut once. The more time that you spend kind of planning everything out and getting the right metrics, the more successful your test is going to be, and the better that data is going to be at the end of that. And then that last point there, leverage hybrid experimentation for growth. There are a number of different ways to run tests. Paul Bernier talked through some of those options earlier in our conversation. Tyler highlighted a lot of those in his examples too. Client-side, server-side testing allows you to really, really leverage the right experience, the right data points to have a really strong impact on your overall product roadmap and experimentation roadmap and the overall vision for the organization. So really quick, really great data, really great points that we've talked through today. I do want to spend a little bit of time. I think we do have a couple of questions, right, Polly, that we can talk through and answer as we finish up our session here.
Yeah, thanks, John. So one question that came through is, are there common areas of improvements you see for A/B testing with your customers? Tyler, Paul, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can take that. And Paul, if you have anything to
Yeah,
add, feel
go for
free.
it. Go after. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it really depends on the industry in terms of what are standard practices. Oftentimes for e-commerce, we see the largest opportunity from product page redesigns. Product page redesigns are ultimately that final decision point before purchase. So isolating, kind of as Paul mentioned in his example as well, what are those factors that ultimately build towards the goal of someone reaching a product page? So with that, I mean, it is going to depend on the industry. But Paul, anything you'd like to add from your end?
Yeah, I'll throw a few. PDP optimization, I agree with that. Form optimization is a classic, I'd say we see, whether that's B2B lead gen or more complex checkout flow. It's a huge piece of the final piece before you get the conversion. More e-com centric, I'd say search results is an area we always see a lot of potential and a lot of testing volume, both the presentation, filtering, sorting algorithms, and then recommendations optimization is another good one. Again, maybe more e-com centric, though that also applies to content recommendations. So the layout, the positioning, how many do you get, the algorithms. Those are a few that come to mind.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And just quick last question here. Are there any tools that you recommend that can be used for creating and managing your testing roadmap?
Yeah. Um, we love Miro. We are a big Miro support team at Roboboogie. So that is typically where we'll introduce the roadmap. We actually have something that we call the Conversion Compass. That is a service that utilizes Miro as well as your business objectives, and the output is that roadmap. So we love Miro. I've also seen, you can do things like Excel, Google Sheets. There's not a one size fits all, but Miro does have a lot of lovely features that really can scale your experimentation program.
Awesome. Well, I just want to wrap up and say thank you so much, everyone who attended and spent time with us in this last hour. We really hope that you found this session insightful and valuable, and you can implement this into your day-to-day. If you are interested in learning more about SiteSpect or Roboboogie, please reach out, let us know. We'd be happy to have a conversation with you. And look out for more webinars in the future. I will send this out as well, the deck and the recording, to all attendees so that you can reference back to it.